Hello, Eugene is here, and I would like to show you what to do after e4, c6. As Roman mentioned, Caro-Kann is really popular at top-level grandmasters. d4. Later on, we're also going to take a look at knight f3, d5, knight c3, where white typically keeps the pawn on d2. But for now, let's focus on the main line, d4, and here black plays d5.
And actually, it's difficult to say what the main line is, even after these two moves. White has several continuations. E takes d, as well as e5, knight c3, and even knight d2. But knight d2 and knight c3 will make absolutely no difference in our lecture here, because we're planning on taking on e4. So those are the main moves. And here is Eugene with one of the main continuations, knight c3.
Yes, after knight c3, we simply take on e4, knight takes e4, and we play bishop to f5.
Now this variation was played for decades, more than 50 years, and it was very popular. White was getting, Botvinnik was playing this variation very frequently and was getting good positions. But then they found some advantage for white. So this variation was for many years back and forth on the list of the most playable positions against e4.
And now the main line is knight g3, hitting the bishop, and bishop to g6. We should also mention that there is a less popular move, knight c5.
And here is the list of continuations black can choose. Well, this move is known, and this move is known as not giving any problems to black. Black can play b6, queen c8, as well as knight d7, and after knight takes b7, queen b6, getting the pawn back. So we don't want to really pay close attention and spend much time on knight c5 move. Just use one of those continuations and look on any opening manual that will give you a very satisfactory answer to that. So main move is knight g3, and that's where Eugene is going to present you good material.
So now we just simply play bishop g6, and notice black's idea. He's going to play later on e6, and now the bishop on g6 is much better placed than on c8, where it's going to be looking in his own pawn on e6. So this is, notice this pawn structure with e6 and c6 is the key plan for black.
The idea is to keep, in other words, what Eugene is saying, that we want to have this light squared bishop outside our pawn structure and not being locked inside black's e6 and c6 pawn.
So after bishop g6, white has several options. The most popular move is h4, threatening to win a piece with h5. And here you have to be careful and prevent that with playing h6 yourself.
Actually, h5 is not threatening to win a piece, but it's threatening to get serious advantage. After h5, we can go bishop f5 back, and we're going to have after knight takes a5, queen a5 check and taking, but black is losing a lot of tempos and white will get an advantage. So it's very reasonable to stop the h pawn from further advancement. So the move is h6.
And now white can play immediate h5 or a more tricky move, knight to f3. Now, if white plays knight f3, you have to counter it immediately with knight to d7. In case you don't play knight d7, white is threatening to play knight to e5, hitting the bishop, and it's going to be very hard to get rid of this powerful knight on e5.
At least black is going to lose a tempo. So knight d7 is by far the best move in this position.
And now white plays h5, bishop h7, and here white really cannot stand this powerful bishop on h7, and he plays bishop to d3 with idea to trade the bishops.
And it makes a lot of sense because black's bishop made 3 moves and white bishop on d3 made 1 move, wants to exchange the bishop that made 3 moves. But in reality, white doesn't gain any time. If this bishop made 3 moves and this bishop made 1 move, white has to justify somehow 2 moves with an h-pawn. So after bishop d3, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3.
And here we have 2 possible moves, knight g to f6, or the move that we recommend is e6, immediately opening the dark square bishop.
So, for some time, this was known, it's just move transposition. Play e6 followed by knight f6, or play knight f6 followed by e6 was the same, but it's more accurate for the idea that we want to introduce is move e6. And here is why.
And now white has 2 main lines. The one main line starts with bishop f4 with idea to develop the bishop and take control over the d6 and c7 squares. And we're going to counter this move with the move queen to a5 check, forcing white to play bishop to d2. Because c3 doesn't really accomplish much, because now white is going to have trouble to castle with the king.
Castle queenside it is, because of the a2 pawn will be hanging. And for a number of years, bishop d2 move in this position was equivalent to bishop f4 move. And the reason for it is, if white plays bishop d2, black plays queen c7, and if white plays bishop f4, black plays queen a5 check, and since there is no c3 on bishop d2, playing queen c7, transposing to the same line. But in this case, after bishop f4, queen a5 check, bishop d2, we are not going back queen c7 and giving you the well-known line, because otherwise, if we did that, then there is no purpose to our suggestion. So we have a relatively new idea in that we're introducing. It's not our idea, but we developed some. The idea is bishop b4. Now, why we playing bishop b4 move?
The main idea of this move is to force white to play c3, and we're simply going to jump back to e7, and white has nothing better than to play c4, attacking the queen. And now
And notice that castling kingside is not a good idea, because after knight f6, h5 pawn will be hanging, and besides, the idea of whole opening for white to castle queenside and attack on kingside.
So white has to play c4 if he wants to fight for advantage. And now we go back to c7 with our queen. So notice the subtleties of this line. In the original line that has been played many years, we play this position with the pawn on c2, but now there is a pawn on c4, and this gives black extra options, especially if white is going to castle queenside. And these extra options include very powerful attack with the move b5. So let's go back to this position. So again, the idea is we play bishop b4, forcing white to play c3, bishop e7, c4, and then we play queen c7. And in this position, the main line is castles, and black simply plays knight g2 f6. So this is very topical position for the variation. So now let us go back. And here I would like to mention that instead of bishop f4, white can also play bishop to d2, not allowing the queen a5 check. And black's plan is actually very similar. So here we start with knight g f6, castles, bishop to e7, and the only difference is earlier we had our queen on c7 and the pawn on c4. Here white has a pawn on c2 and queen on d8. In both of these positions, black's plan is to play kingside castle. And we're going to examine it in more detail. But for now, let us go back to the position after bishop to f4, queen a5 check, bishop d2, bishop d4. Is there a way white can try to punish black for playing bishop to b4 so early? Let us take a look at the move knight to e4. Actually, the knight is still on g8 here. So knight to e4. So this is the idea. Since black's knight hasn't been developed to f6, and black played bishop to b4, the idea behind knight e4 is twofold: to take advantage over the key square, and if black plays knight to f6, this allows this check, knight d6 check. Notice that taking the knight loses the queen. So is this a refutation? And the answer is no. Black is totally fine, and this is one of those rare examples that king is very safe on e7. So we play king e7, attacking the knight. Now white has two options here, knight to c4, or white can try to take the pawn on b7. Either one, black has sufficient defense. So let's take a look at knight takes pawn first. Simply bishop takes d2, knight takes d2. It seems as though white is just much better. We have a king in the middle, and white has an extra pawn after knight takes b7. But here we have this very powerful move, queen to b4, hitting the knight and the pawn on b2. White has to play queen b3, giving up the d4 pawn. And now this position is actually quite safe for black. This knight on b7 is deep in enemy territory, and it's going to be very hard to keep it defended. The king on e7 is actually temporarily misplaced, but after we play one of our h rooks to either c8 or b8, we should be able to quickly play king to f8 if needed for a manual castle. But for now, let's take a look at this position after longside castle. Here we play rook a to b8. We can also play rook h to b8, but I want to keep the rook go to c8, which is a better square. And now the following could happen. Queen a3, check, simply c5. Notice that there is no very good move discovery attack for white. And if white plays knight a5, we can simply play rook h to c8, defending against knight c6, knight f3, and here with the next move, black actually, I believe, gets a powerful edge in the endgame with queen to b4. And here, black is better, and the following could happen. Queen takes, pawn takes, and it's clear that we have the c-file, much better pawn structure, and the knight on a5 is misplaced, and the king on e7 is actually doing quite nice.